right now, across the United States, thousands of people are forced to work for pennies an hour. And if they refuse, they are punished.
Right.
And the more shocking part is that the U.S. Constitution explicitly says this is perfectly legal. Welcome to this custom deep dive. Today's mission is looking at the fine print of the 13th Amendment.
Yeah, we've pulled together a whole stack of historical, legal analyses, Supreme Court rulings, and modern constitutional reform articles to really unpack that infamous exception clause.
Right, the one that abolished slavery except as a punishment for crime. For you, the listener, we are exploring the common misconception that if you are convicted of a crime, you legally become a slave.
Which is a really intense thing to think about.
It really is. It feels like reading the fine print on a historic contract that just completely changes the deal.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to parse what that exception actually permits, the legal analyses we're looking at draw a really sharp line between chattel slavery and involuntary servitude.
Okay, so what's the actual legal difference there?
So chattel slavery is absolute legal ownership. I mean, humans are legally property, they have no rights, and it's a hereditary status.
Right.
But involuntary servitude just allows temporary, compelled labor. The government doesn't actually own the person.
Oh, I see. So the government can force you to, like, cook or fight fires, but they don't hold a deed to your life.
Exactly. And a prisoner still retains fundamental constitutional protections. You know, like the 8th Amendment for food and medical care, the First Amendment, the 14th.
I mean, I know an 1871 case, I think it was Ruffin v. Commonwealth, famously called prisoners slaves of the state.
Yeah, that's true. But modern Supreme Court jurisprudence has entirely abandoned that doctrine. The courts maintain that you don't lose your legal personhood when you enter the prison system.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
If prisoners retain all these rights and they aren't legally slaves, why did the framers explicitly leave the word slavery in that exception? Isn't that just asking for abuse?
Well, yes. And the historical consensus in our sources points out that it was immediately abused.
Wait, really? How quickly?
Basically, right after the Civil War, Southern states passed black codes to criminalize behaviors like loitering or vagrancy.
Which basically just meant being unemployed, right?
Exactly. And once thousands of newly freed black Americans were arrested, the state held the legal right to exact involuntary servitude. They realized they could essentially sublet that constitutional right to private enterprises.
Wow. Like coal mines and plantations.
Yep. They used it to recoup state costs through something called convict leasing.
So it's essentially a constitutional zoning loophole. The 13th Amendment bulldozed the institution of private slavery across the country, but explicitly zoned prisons as the one district where those exact same labor practices were legally permitted to operate.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And what's fascinating here is how this connects to today. That specific legal architecture wasn't just a post-war phase. It is what permits modern prison labor right now.
Because contemporary prisoners frequently work for very low wages.
Right, sometimes just pennies an hour. And refusing can mean solitary confinement or a loss of good time credits. Our research notes that federal courts consistently uphold this multi-billion-dollar labor system specifically because that exception clause provides direct constitutional cover.
It's like a dangerous legal computer bug coded in 1865 that is still running in the justice system's background today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for you listening, understanding this mechanism is crucial right now because legal scholars are pointing out that this history is actively sparking a modern abolition movement.
Right. Several states, including Colorado, Utah, and Alabama, have recently rewritten their own state constitutions to just rip out those exception clauses entirely.
So to synthesize our sources today, an incarcerated person is recognized by modern courts as a human being with fundamental rights, not a slave. Yet the exception clause remains this historical scar that legally permits forced, underpaid labor.
Exactly. It's a structural mechanism that is still very much active.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder as we wrap up. If this state-level abolition movement keeps growing and forced unpaid labor is entirely outlawed across the board, what happens to those multi-billion-dollar industries that currently rely on the prison system when those workers suddenly demand a standard minimum wage?